Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Too Cool for Middle School. I think it's been a little while since I've made a video and I didn't have this chair last time. I don't know if you can see it, but it's like this kind of like corduroy emerald green chair and it's so comfortable. So I feel like the vibe of the video is a little bit different because I just get to like sit back and chill. But I'm happy to be here today with my first love, YouTube. I wish that I still had time to make videos as often as I used to. It's so different when your kids get into like activities. Like my son, Jensen, is 8 now, and so he has soccer and like birthday parties and just like other events that he didn't have before. And you know, they're like a different time every week and stuff. So now Saturdays are not such a good like stay at home and do all my little side project things days anymore. Different stage of life now, but I need to figure out how to transition into this because I do have a lot of side projects that need to get done and I'm not doing a very good job balancing all of this. But anyway, I have a couple of minutes. It's Sunday morning. I think my kids are playing. We'll see if we hear screams. But I wanted to talk about banned books. Banned Books Week was a couple weeks ago, and I created a really cool lesson to do with my students. It's something that I had been wanting to bring into the classroom for a while, and so it's nice to have those types of things, you know, like the Banned Books Week or whatever, just because it kind of motivates me sometimes to just like get something done. And you could really teach this at any time. I mean, I was like, guess what guys, it's Banned Books Week, so we're gonna talk about this, and they're like, if you say so. Like it doesn't really matter when you teach this. But with anything that has kind of a controversy around it, or you know, maybe two sides of an argument around it, I always like to have very specific terms that we are actually arguing about or discussing, and like a really specific question. I don't like bringing things to kids that's just like, should we ban books? Should people be able to ban books? Yes or no? Like that's not actually constructive, and those conversations don't turn out well. But if you can really define your terms and give students like very concrete examples to work from, then those discussions go much better. That has been my advice about, you know, discussions in the classroom for a long time. So I have my lesson plan here. Let's just kind of chat through it this morning. So the kind of like essential question that we have is, how do people interpret stories differently? Because that's kind of at the crux of why people ban books. Most of the time, people who are trying to ban a book have not even read it, so their interpretation is not even really based on anything. But let's like give people the benefit of the doubt, even though it's like such a small percentage of people who've actually read things they're trying to ban. And let's just, you know, assume that they are just interpreting things in a different way. Okay, there's teacher instructions. There are links for notes that your students can take. I do almost everything in my class digitally. I just from like an equity standpoint, it's just nice when students don't lose things and they have something that they can access from home and whatever. But for this, I actually printed everything because it was just nice to work with paper, to physically write things down, and they were, you know, like reading through the articles. So I've got links. All right. Mariah's very obsessed with Band-Aids. Bandages. She calls them bandages, huh? You're very proper. These days, so she has her little bandages, and we have not done hair and everything yet, but you can come hang out with us. So anyway, ahead of time, you would just need to either print or push out the notes, and then either print or push out the links to the articles. And there's 3 altogether. 2 of them I found on Newsella, and so I just used the Newsella link. But if you don't have Newsella, I also linked the original publication as well. So it's up to you which version you want to use. So then you would start your class with this slide, how do people interpret stories differently? We start off by just kind of highlighting like how people are different readers and we have different preferences. So what do you like to read? When you see the options on the following slides, stand up and go to the side of the room that you agree with most. So we're getting kids up and on their feet, doing a little kinesthetic activity. Okay, so I would rather read fiction, stories, or nonfiction, like information. And so then they go stand on whichever side of the room they like better. I'd rather read graphic novels or novels in verse. And these are things that we had been talking about in class, so they knew what those were. And then you can actually edit these as well if you want to change them to different like categories. You want some milk? Okay. Where is it?
On the bedroom.
Okay, can you go get it for me?
Sure. I got it.
Ugh. Hold, please. Really like this chair. I need to spend more time in this chair. Okay, anyway, moving on. We have science fiction versus historical fiction, stories with a happy ending versus stories with a sad ending. You know, they're starting to get into more complex stories now. Some kids have a preference there. A scary story versus a funny story, story about heartbreak versus a story about time travel, a character who experiences trauma versus a character who has a perfect family. I feel like there's kind of a shift in middle school or high school where you want the characters in your books to like reflect real life a little bit more, and you don't accept stories that are too like neatly tied up with a bow. So some kids are there, some kids are not. Would you rather read about a character who's older than me going through difficult situations? That was kind of what I liked to read when I was younger, even now actually. I like reading about people who are more middle-aged. A character my age going through things that I experience. That's also a really important type of book for kids. A book about a character very different from me, or a book about a character who I have a lot in common with. And as the teacher, you could add to these, you can change them, you can do whatever you want. But the final question is, have you read A Wrinkle in Time? Yes or no, and they'll go to their sides. And it doesn't matter if they haven't, the lesson still works, but it's kind of nice if they have. Just a few of my students had. Okay, so let me say thank you, please have a seat. And on their notes, they're gonna go sit down and like record some of the answers that they had written down. So we've just kind of established that people have different preferences when it comes to reading. We're not all gonna like the same books or gravitate toward the same books, and that's fine. Now this question really got people talking. What are some topics or genres that you do not like to read? So there's some things that people just don't wanna read. For example, I don't like a book where the conflict is all based on an affair. I don't like that. It makes me uncomfortable to read about affairs. I don't want it. Occasionally it'll be kind of like a side plot in a book or something, and it's okay, but I don't really like to read about that. I also have a pet peeve with YA novels where I don't like when the whole conflict is just because like the parents won't tell their kid about something. There's just like a thing that the kid wants to know and the parents won't tell them. So then the whole plot is just like the kid trying to figure this thing out. Like I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter that's the whole plot, and I don't prefer that. It just makes me annoyed at the parents. Like just tell your kid the thing that they need to know. Do you see what they're putting themselves through? So anyway, we spent quite a while on this. Like kids had really funny things that they were just like very passionately like, I do not like books about this. And yeah, so that was a fun conversation. So, you know, we established we do not all have the same taste in books. So then we moved on to specifically A Wrinkle in Time. It's a science fiction book that takes its characters to a different dimension. Is that the kind of book that you like to read? For me, I would probably typically say no. I maybe wouldn't be drawn necessarily to that description of a book, but I did read it when I was younger and liked it, and then I reread it once I was older because I had kind of forgotten about it. So for kids who haven't read it or just like need a little refresher, there's a video that just does like a 3-minute summary of the book, and so they're just going to write down a couple details just so they have something to reference later, because again, we are having conversations and having discussions based on concrete things, like actual facts about the book, not just like our thoughts about things, right? And then the movie trailer, we also have them watch the movie trailer because that kind of gives you a sense of what the book is like. I really liked the movie. I thought it was so good. I love Ava DuVernay. Okay, so then I just gave them a few stats about the book. Published in 1962. So we talked about like how many generations of kids have probably read this at this point, and it's kind of fun to be like another generation of people reading this same book that maybe like our grandparents read, their grandparents. Okay, and this book is intended for 9 to 11-year-olds. I gave them the Lexile level because they had just like taken a test that showed them their Lexile level. And this again is all to kind of establish like who this book is for, whether or not it's too hard for upper elementary and middle school kids. So we'll kind of see how this comes into play later. And then it's also ranked number 23 on the American Library Association's top 100 most frequently challenged books, mostly in the 90s. And this is where kids are like, what? Why would you challenge this book? Like, it's for kids. It's got this like accessible reading level. Why are we banning this? Why are we challenging this? So now we get into the texts. And the first one that I had them read is about how A Wrinkle in Time inspired female scientists when they read it as young people. So the article is really interesting. And there's, you know, 3 different women that they interviewed who had read A Wrinkle in Time when they were younger, and then that like inspired them to go into a career in science, either because they were just inspired by like the idea of time travel and like different dimensions. Like one of the ladies becomes a physicist, and then one of them like really liked Meg's mom and how she was a scientist, and she was inspired by that, even though she's not like the main character, but that really stuck with her. So the whole article is short but really good. And then we also asked them, have you ever read a book that made you consider a particular career choice? Sometimes through a book, it just kind of gives you a little blueprint for like, I could do this. And I was kind of joking, but I was like, you know, every time I read like a mystery, like I feel like I could be a detective. Like maybe I should switch careers. Like if I figure it out before the end of the book, then like, you know what, maybe I could do this as a living. So through that article, we established that, you know, there were these women who are probably like my age or a little bit older who read it probably like in the 90s, like during that time when it was very highly challenged. But it inspired them to become, they all have PhDs, they're all doing these amazing things, and that was part of their career journey, part of like deciding who they were. So then the next article is about the religious controversy and why people banned or challenged the book. Okay, come sit on my lap.
Okay.
She's pretending to be hurt. She loves a bandage. Here you go.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so we read about how people thought that it was like blasphemous and that like the women were like witches, and there's a scene with like Jesus and Buddha or something. I don't really even remember that scene. But again, this is a different way to interpret it. Like some people interpreted it this way. Madeleine L'Engle was a religious person, and this was just kind of like her way of writing about faith. And the final question is just like, have you ever stopped reading a book because you were offended by the material in it? And I have, and my students said they had. Like sometimes there's too many cuss words in a book, or, you know, it turned out that it was like a little bit for older kids, you know, than they realized when they first picked it up or whatever. So it's fine to stop reading a book because you're offended by the material in it. You can just put that down. But our question later is going to become, now should no one be able to read that book just because you don't want to read it, right? So then the final little essay that we read is actually what kind of like inspired me to make this unit. So it's this essay written by a high school senior who just wrote about what A Wrinkle in Time meant to her when she read it. And she interpreted it differently from how I would interpret it.
I want to go see the video.
Go ahead.
Okay.
So anyway, she was saying that as she read the book, you know, she said as somebody who is neurodivergent, she read the characters as neurodivergent. Like she saw those traits in Meg, for example. And so that's not something that I've ever thought of as I was reading the book, but she saw like herself reflected in the characters. She also says that she doesn't know yet how she identifies, but she just knows she's not like straight. Some of my students asked what she means by that. Like, okay, well, she's not boy crazy. That's not how she operates. And she felt like she could sense that like in Meg as well, or maybe some of the other characters. So that's her interpretation, and it made her feel seen, and it made her connect with this book, and it gave her like a place to kind of escape to outside of, you know, she said she was like bullied in school and stuff. So this book was really special for her. Even if all of us didn't interpret it exactly the same way as she did, it was a really important and like affirming book for her. Okay, so we talked about like how many years earlier the book had been published. Like this is a long time, and we still have young people, you know, connecting with this book. And then, has there ever been a book that made you feel seen in this way? I love that we have so many diverse books now, just about so many different characters written by so many different authors. So hopefully your students have an example of a book like that. They might not remember though. Okay, so our writing prompt is, if a book inspires and validates some readers but offends others, should it be banned? So we're not just gonna say like, should books be banned? Like, should we allow people to ban books? But let's, you know, provide some parameters here. So if a book inspires and validates some readers but offends others, should it be banned? And then, you know what, we added another qualifier, banned from school libraries. Because they did start to ask like, well, could people just like go get it on Amazon or just go get it from a bookstore? Like book bans are a little bit different now just because we do have like so much more access to books. Like when I was younger, it was just kind of like, if a book wasn't at my school, I probably wasn't gonna be able to get it. So we start just with the thesis statement, and they could just really like copy the prompt. That's fine because it sets up their essay in a strong way. So that was fine with me. And so then I asked for 2 examples from the text that support their answer. So we ended up doing a 5-paragraph essay. So they had to do an introduction that contained a hook and then address the prompt and stated their thesis. And so they had to write their next 2 body paragraphs using 2 of the examples from the text that we read. And they can argue it either way. Like they can still say, you know, if people are offended, they should be able to ban this book. It's gonna be a little bit harder to make that case like with the text that we have, but I don't know, they can say that people should not be affirmed and should not be inspired to become scientists if people think that it's blasphemous. So they can argue it either way. And honestly, some people did have kind of like nuanced theses. It was pretty cool. So they give their 2 examples from the text that we read, and then their 3rd paragraph, or like the 3rd body paragraph, had to be an example from a different banned book that had been banned just anywhere in the United States recently, probably. I guess it could have been at any time, but they were looking kind of more for the recent ones. So they just had to find an example of books that had been banned. A lot of them chose like Charlotte's Web, Dogman, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, those like No David books where there's like little butt crack shows sometimes. And so they wrote about like different occasions when that had happened, when books were banned, and then like, you know, why that is silly or what kids are missing out on. One kid was just like, kids are not gonna have a sense of humor if you ban all books with like butt jokes. He was like, we don't want to grow up in a world with kids who have no sense of butt humor. So those are their 3 body paragraphs. 1 with a Wrinkle in Time example, another one with a Wrinkle in Time example, and then a 3rd one with an example of any book. Then for me, you know, as somebody grading it, I could kind of see, like I knew what the first 3 paragraphs were gonna be, like, okay, and like kind of easier to grade. And then that 4th paragraph was, you know, kind of like a fun surprise every time I got to it to see which book kids chose. And then their conclusion, and the conclusion is like a, so what? Like, and now what? What do we do with this information? What do you want your reader to do now that they have heard your argument? So this was our first you know, argument writing essay of the year, and it went really well for the most part. They did a very good job. And I think I forgot to mention this before, but this was with 7th grade English. So this was really good for, you know, just like the 7th grade writing level and maturity level, and kind of, you know, they just related to it well, responded to it well. But you could use it with 8th, high school, maybe 6th as well, just kind of depending on how you teach it. So anyway, Mariah needs me to like fix her TV or something, so I gotta go, but I will of course link this down below. One of the very first Teachers Pay Teachers things I ever made was like a book versus movie Wrinkle in Time comparison thing. I haven't looked at it in years. It's probably a disaster, but I'll link that down below as well. Again, she fakes injuries so that she can use a bandage. Okay, thank you for being here. Thanks for hanging out with me this morning, and I will see you in my next video. Oh, next time, let's talk about the anxious generation and how this is a much better alternative. I've been talking about it on Instagram so much, I feel like we need to just like summarize everything here, so maybe we'll do a whole anxious generation takedown. Okay, let's go for real. All right, bye guys.